most digital marketing or tracking systems are very specific to specific platforms. Here the idea is to have a standard that allows it to make it very easy to integrate with anything. Now if you look at how this actually works when you come to a system that's managed by a CMS, so you load a page, then you get back JavaScript that tells you here's where the context server is. Then you ask the context server for the context, and then you get the context back and you can do whatever you want with it. So all this comes back to the browser. The browser is doing a lot of the work also. So, what does this mean in terms of use cases? So it means that, for example, let's say you have an existing website that has no personalization, that's not tracking users. So you could just install Unomi and start tracking your visitors. I mean, it's pretty simple to set up. And then you can start, once you have this information, you can start segmenting your users, you can start delivering personalized content to them. Or whatever you want to do. There's probably some usages that we haven't imagined yet. The other use case that's very interesting is, let's say you have a native mobile application. And very honestly, most people nowadays, they send data to other people. The developers of mobile application, they will use Flurry or another mobile analytics system, and they're sending this data out to this external system, and they have no idea what they're doing with it. They're charging you for it, and you have no way of doing more than what the system offers you. If you introduce Unomi into that, you're running your own system, or we're expecting that maybe some people will offer software as a service from Unomi, and then you can do whatever you want with the data. So you're not losing control. So, I talked a little bit about what Unomi is, and now what I want to do is tell you the real-world story of how we built Marketing Factory, our product, on top of Apache Unomi. So, let's look at the end result. Let's look at the UI. So we have a UI that looks a lot like material design. It's actually not material design, but it really looks like it. Where we have reporting tools, such as here we have the site dashboard with the number of visitors and new visitors. We have UIs such as list of visitors, where we can see, okay, who are the visitors that I've identified as leads and that I want to contact. We can then drill down into a profile and say, oh, actually, this wasn't a real visitor. That was the Google bot. So, I want to treat this one differently. I don't want to actually send an email. There's also UIs to build conditions, and those conditions will be used for segments. So basically here, this condition tries to match visitors that are between 20 and 30 years old. So all these UIs are things that you want to build on top of Unomi, but these are just the ones we've built. You could build more. Looking at how this is actually done in terms of interactions with the server, well, we have a module running on our platform that's connected to the administration URL of Unomi, and then we have the live content pages that are sending data to Unomi about what the user are actually doing, because basically we're tracking clicks or tracking anything else. Now if you look at the platform we had to integrate with, so meaning that we're not starting a new project, we're actually running this inside an existing platform. So the overall platform is running a UI that's been developed in Grid with Sencha.jxt, so that's what the red box is. And then inside we have an iframe that allows you to build extra administration interfaces. So how did we build this? Well, it was an iterative process. We didn't get it right at first. So the first try was, well, let's build this with jQuery, Spring MVC, and JSP. I get your question. Why on earth would we do that? Well, because the product has evolved over a long time, and this was the way that you actually built modules initially. If you were building a new UI for the administration, you would build it using these technologies. Now the good thing about that, it's a known problem. I mean, we know what to expect. We know how to do this. But actually, it's a bit of a shame because interfacing with something like Unomi means that everything is going to have to go first through the platform and then send back to Unomi. It means that you have to set up all these different frameworks to work properly. And basically, the prototype was really slowing us down. I mean, basically, it really took a lot of time to get these things working. So we said, okay, scrap that. Let's try again. Let's look at other stuff. So now, I like that quote up there from the Matrix. It says, the problem is choice. And honestly, with front-end technologies, I think most of you will agree with this. You really don't know what to choose sometimes. And so this is just a little bit of the choices you have. These are the dates of the 1.0 releases. But you can see that you can easily get lost in the problem choice. So we set goals for the selection process. We were interested in a mature system, a mature framework, a large community, something that would offer us a lot of speed of development, that is as future-proof as we can hope it will be, and finally that has large, or as large as possible, browser support, which is a big challenge nowadays. So one of the ones we looked at was Amber.js. And I know there are a few talks about Amber, I think it's today. And one of the things we really liked about it is its maturity. It's really a framework that's been there for a while. It's a very interesting component model. There's a lot more things we could say about what we liked. But some of the things that didn't work for us was that at the time we were evaluating these, it required a little bit more code than other more recently established frameworks. The community was relatively small, but that could be a strength also, but in our case it was something we were a little bit scared of. The data banking mechanism at the time was a little bit less powerful than the other ones, and the productivity was okay, but you know, it wasn't fantastic, let's say. Now, the question we thought about a lot was React. Basically, React really has this concept that they brought about the virtual DOM that is really interesting, and actually most people started stealing it from them once they released it. It has server-side rendering, which can be really useful, and it has also an interesting component model. But at the time we were doing the selection process, it's also very new, and the thing that history taught us is that you have to ask yourselves about React, what happens if Facebook drops it? This happened to Parse just recently, so you have to be careful with these some of these selection processes. It's still a rapidly changing. It was still a rapidly changing system. It's let's say stabilized a lot now. This is a personal opinion, because I know people go back and forth, but I don't really like the mixing of templated code and actual logic code. I know people will disagree with this, but I've gone through the whole JSP scriptlet thing, and it kind of reminds me of that too much. At the time also, JSX was really new and a bit of a strange beast. It's gone a lot better now. And the binding mechanisms are very powerful, but at quite low level. So we didn't choose React. We looked at another interesting one called Riot.js. Well, this again is a personal opinion, just because it separates the contemplating code and the logic code a lot better. And it's much smaller, but the biggest problem with Riot is it has a very small community. And again, it's just a Vue framework, so we wanted something more comprehensive. And last but not least, I should mention Aurelia. How many people are familiar with Aurelia here? Yeah, that's not what I expect, not many. So Aurelia is from the maker of the project called Durandal. This is really a very smart guy that's been working on this. And he's so smart that actually when Angular was looking for people to work on Angular 2, they hired him. And, well, he didn't stay, but he started Aurelia instead. And so it's definitely a project to watch. It's very unknown what will happen with it on the long term, but it's really something to watch. And there's a company behind it, and so it's going to be very interesting. Now it's very young, so it's not yet production ready, and the community is just starting around it. So we chose, finally, Angular. So let's get right to it. So what happened? Well, we started with a prototype, of course. So we did it as simple as possible. So basically, we have our platform that delivers to the browser the Angular UI, and the Angular UI ties directly to Apache Unomi. So the prototype was developed really quickly, so that was really something we liked. And basically, everything looked pretty good, but we ran into one problem. We have, inside of what we wanted to build, a very dynamic UI to build rules. So what you see here are rules with recursive conditions, meaning that you have like a condition that can connect to another condition, and then you have lists of operators such as and you have also lists of actions here, and you have drag and drop of these different conditions or actions that can build the UI. So that proves a challenge, because if you look at it from a structure point of view, you really have a tree of conditions. And so, very quickly we thought, okay, well, let's build components for these conditions using Angular. And these components can have subtypes. It can be AND condition, OR condition, an interest, a profile property matching, anything. But what it means is when we render this, we're actually rendering conditions based on the subtype and doing this recursively. So that, unfortunately, was a little bit harder than we thought to do initially. This is what we wanted to write. This is the code that we were hoping, right, except for this part. And actually what happened is when you use something like that, it goes into a recursive loop. Because basically the Angular version at the time, I think they've fixed that since then, but actually was trying to resolve the directives recursively, and it would never stop. So you had to use this ugly hack for the compilation to make sure that it would stop as you expect it to. So this is what we ended up using. We didn't like it very much, but we did. Another thing that I don't know how many of you have had this problem so far, but when you're building UIs that are actually running inside the browser, you might be building stuff that might have security issues. In our case, the problem was we were directly talking to the endpoint that manages profiles, so very secure information potentially. And this was completely bypassing all the security mechanisms of our framework that, for example, checked whether you were an administrator, if you had the permissions to do all these things. And so here, the best way we could solve this was to actually relay those secure calls through the platform. So we built this proxy servlet that would take the REST API calls and filter them, meaning that only the ones that were allowed by the authentication would actually reach the Unomi server. What this also meant is that we no longer have to expose the administration URL to the whole world. Now, in order to leverage a framework like Angular, you have to unlearn some of the things that you've done before. And one of the biggest challenges with the internal teams was they were very comfortable with jQuery, and they really liked jQuery, and they could do things quickly with jQuery. But the problem was that that's not the best way to do it in Angular. If you try to do jQuery in Angular, I can tell you, you're going to fail, and you're going to hate it. And so we had to unlearn a lot of things. And so here we just go quickly around a few of the important parts, is that basically in jQuery you do DOM manipulation. That's how you do the changes in the HTML. In Angular, you do modifications to JavaScript objects, and then Angular will magically update your DOM for you. So that's sort of the double-edged sword. It's great, but you also have to be careful about performance, but they've been working hard to make sure that those things work well. In terms of reusing logic, on jQuery, you have to build plugins, and I know very few people who actually did that. You end up sometimes copying the code, or it can get ugly fast. In Angular, it's really part of the framework. You build directives. And finally, in terms of data binding and scoping, those are notions that only exist inside of Angular. So learning to use these and understanding them was really something that made us a lot more productive once we understood them. The other things that we did wrong was we discovered some components too late. As I said, I talked about it looked like Angular material or material design, but actually we discovered those components too late. So we had actually redeveloped a lot of components, which was a mistake. So That was something we wish we had done differently. As I said, learning to use directives, that has a learning curve. And we really had this problem of building dynamic UIs. A lot of the examples you see in documentation or even tutorials will show you static designs and say, okay, this is how you build a static design. But suddenly you have to, like, more complex components structures, and then it can be a little bit more difficult. Now, if I can just get a quick show of hands, how many people here work server-side? Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. So basically, dependency injection is something on the server side we've been used to for a while now. So it's not that difficult to understand. But for front-end developers that have never seen it before, it's like, what on earth is this thing? So that can be, something that takes time. And on our front-end developers, it clearly was something that they didn't understand or thought was really complicating things. And finally, high loading times, because Angular 1 is not very modular. So there are tools that help you with this, but it's not perfect. Now, I've talked about the experience of what we've been doing until now, and now I want to talk about what we'll be doing based on this experience. So I want to talk about Angular 2. So when the Angular team introduced Angular 2, somebody raised their hand and said, what about migration or compatibility? Will my Angular 1 code work in Angular 2? And the answer Google gave is probably one of the biggest mistakes they've ever made in an open source project, because they say, no, there won't be any migration path, and it's not going to be compatible. And basically, I think that's part of the reason people started looking at alternatives. Because they suddenly said, wait a minute, I've invested in Angular and now you're telling me this? And, fortunately, people learn from their mistakes, and Angular 2 did also. So in the Angular project news, they actually announced the migration path. They said that they're allowing on the same page you to use both Angular 1 and Angular 2 components in the same application. So you can use components in the same view. You can inject services between Angular 1 and Angular 2. And even data binding works across both versions. So they went from, no way, it's not going to work, to actually, let's figure something out. I'm not going to go into the details of the process of how they propose to migrate, because it's quite long. But it's a very iterative process. What's nice about it is that you can really take your existing application and bit by bit migrate it to Angular 2. Of course, none of this is finalized, so you might want to wait for a finalized version of Angular 2 before starting this process. But clearly, they're addressing it. Now, I was like, well, we have these tree structures. How will I build these in Angular 2? Can I build them? Because if I can't, it's a deal breaker. I have to stay with one or look at something else. Well, actually, the good news is it's actually even much simpler, because they've solved the recursion problem. Here I've actually added the template. So we can see here that I'm building a component called TreeView, and it's actually within this HTML template, it's actually using itself. So I have the recursion there in place, and this is all the code that's needed for the rendering. And you can see on the right, this is an example. This is actually taken from a tutorial. You have the link down here. And you can see that this is much easier, except of course for the syntax up here that some of you might not be familiar with. This is TypeScript. So it's a little bit more structured version of JavaScript that compiles down to JavaScript. In terms of roadmap, this was the hardest slide I had to put together, because the Angular team do not like to give out dates. And so this took actually research in the code base to find some of this information. So they started the project in September 2014. They released Beta 1 last December. They just released Beta 2 in January. And they're aiming for an Angular 2 release state in mid-2016, hoping they can get everything, all the issues ironed out. So I've talked about the migration path, but now let's look a bit further. What does the big picture look like? What should you be looking at well, building web applications, web front ends, and what is, what people are working on. So before I do this, I just want to give another show of hands. How many people are familiar with web components here? Wow, okay. More than I expected, so I won't spend too much time on them. But basically, they're based on W3C standards. They're browser-based, so that means that once you have a component that's built, you can use it with any framework that's aware of web components. It has native, Angular 2 was built with web components in mind, so it will work with that. But there are two, there's actually, I think, a third one, but it's less known. But there are two major implementations of web components right now, it's Polymer and Xtag. The idea really is to promote components like, let's say, calendar components, so you just have a calendar tag in your HTML, and then that's all you need. You can just build your HTML very easily. And not only does it promote reusing elements, and some browsers actually, I don't know if you're familiar, if you know this, but web components actually came from browser makers that were developing their own UI using these technologies. So some of the browser elements are actually built using web components, especially on Firefox. Now, the biggest problem with this is the limited browser support. Even Chrome has issues with web components. They're the main force behind this. In the case of Xtags, one thing I just discovered while I was preparing this talk was this Xtags was actually pushed by the Mozilla Foundation, but since then, Microsoft has been promoting it. And so Xtags is really interesting because it works with all of the, let's say, recently available Internet Explorer versions, including also Microsoft Edge. So if you have a need for maximum compatibility and you want to use web components right now, I suggest you give Xtags a serious look. It's more limited in functionality, but it could be really something that would help you. And finally, the problem is that standards are not fully finalized. Now, reaching the end, I wanted to just bring this to a closing with a few thoughts and conclusions. So, there's a lot of interesting frameworks. I know I've been harsh with some of them, and if there are people involved with any of these here, I want to apologize. These were mostly our evaluations of them, what worked and what didn't work for us. But a lot of these frameworks are really interesting in a lot of ways, and I highly recommend that you give them a serious look and then you validate them for your own needs, not based on what I said here. Angular has a huge community. I mean, when you look at the traffic on Google stats and stuff like that, it's amazing to see how big it is. One of the most amazing metrics of that is the pull requests they get on GitHub. I've never seen a project with so many big pull requests, it's crazy. Angular 2 improvements are really needed over Angular 1. It's really something that they're trying to fix the problems that the first version had. The migration path is available, so that's the good news. Web components, as I said, I personally believe that web components are the future. I have some concerns about whether it will happen or not, but it's definitely something that's very interesting. As I said, not all the APIs are available on all the browsers, so Microsoft is lagging, but hopefully they'll catch up. And one of the biggest things I want you to take away from this is if you choose the right framework with the right criteria, you can go really fast. We went from no code, including no code for Unomi, to Marketing Factory in less than a year. And this is production-ready, highly scalable code, shipping. So you can go really fast if you set these things up. And this is really something that was an objective for us, and that really worked out. So of course, promoting reusability is a really good choice. Don't forget the mobile platforms. And the last thing, which is a problem that we keep forgetting about, is SEO. Angular and SEO doesn't really work. So you have to remember these things, the concessions you're making implicitly. Anyway, thank you very much for your attention. I just want to talk for you, so for those of you who are interested in what we do, we have an event coming up in April. It'll be in Washington, D.C. It's called the Jaya Experience. Look for it on the jaya.com website. It's not up there yet, but I just want to give you a quick notice. The Unomi website is also up here, so it's an incubation project right now at Apache. And finally, we have a booth here, and we'd love to see you there, and we have some free goodies that actually will plug in very well with the charger that Emerson is trying to get rid of. So feel free to come by, and thank you very much. So I don't know if we've lost any of the organizational guys. Oh, feel free to take a break.